Hey y'all, this is Mike with Ink and Audible. Welcome back. I've got my second official book review coming at you. This one's overdue. I did a short on this book, but I've been due for the full book review for a while now. Today we're talking about love, 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 and it's the book all about love by Bell Hooks. And this is an older book. It goes back to I think it was published either in 1998 or 1999. It's one that's been around. Of course, I think a lot of people talk about it. I don't, I can't recall or don't see too many men talking about it. And it's definitely something the guys should pick up and check out. Bell Hooks thinks about love she really goes deep with it. She covers so many sides of love. I think you probably won't have read a book that covers as many facets of love in its full bloom that I can think of off the top of my head. I think most of us just, when we think about love, of course, we think about our significant others and our immediate family, but it doesn't usually go too much deeper than that. From the moment I opened the book up and started reading it, one of the things that caught me is she initially talks about how her interest in the book and her interest in doing this, the book itself started with the what she called the cynicism that she was seeing from the students in her class. Bell Hooks was a college professor in addition to being a well-known and celebrated writer. She was also a college professor, and she's talking about these students. And it wasn't too long after I started sort of going back on the timeline to when she put the book out, that I'm like, when she's talking about this sort of younger generation that seems to be highly cynical and hopeless, and they've got a sense of, there's just a sense of increasing hopelessness and lovelessness. I was like, 1989, 1988, that lines up well with Gen X and maybe, I guess, early stage millennials. So I'm like, she's actually talking about us. She's talking about she's seeing a lot of hopelessness and cynicism in our generation. And honestly, as I think back to folks I knew during that time, and was around during that time, I could see that a lot of people went through one experience, and then love was terrible in every way possible from there. In a sense of like she talks about this generation having a sense of feeling like they're doing everything right and everything they're supposed to do, but at the same time, the love that they think they should have or deserve isn't happening, and why. So she gets really deep in the book about cynicism, and here it is, 25 years later, a little more than 25 years later, when you look at I'm like, wow, think of how much like that same cynicism has grown, and it's been aided in full by social media, which is like the pit of cynicism in today's time. So I wonder, I wonder what she would think today, looking back at what she said then about cynicism, and how just, from the president of the country all the way down, we're just deep, deep, deep in cynicism, and there's got to be a way to turn that around. Part of what she's trying to get across in the book is like widening, widening your understanding of love, and also, in addition to widening your understanding, realizing that people in many ways don't truly understand what love is. Like, one of the first things she does in the book is try to say that she sees a lot of the trouble originates from the very idea that we're all running around with very different definitions of what love is. And, I had to kind of walk that back and think about that a little bit and say to myself, okay, let me think back to like like my first real love experience. And, I'd ask you to like think back to that first real love experience you had, and say, the first time you put those words out there, and I'm talking in the romantic context, the first time you put those words, I love you, out there to whoever it was, do you know exactly what you meant? And do you know that what you meant is exactly what they meant? Or, were you struggling with two different ways that love was defined? Because Bell kind of points that out, that most of us have either, concrete definitions of what love is, or flimsy definitions. They could be any number of things depending on who the person is, what that person's experiences were, and sort of what their experiences were growing up, what it was like in their family. There's so many factors going into that she's like, one of the biggest things you could do um, is make sure when you're getting deeply involved with somebody and it is heading in that direction, that you're both on the same sort of page about what actually love is and what it means to you, and how that should translate and how that person treats you and how you treat them. She talks a lot about the idea that love itself is really about sort of a being invested in the spiritual growth and the growth of that person. And in most ways, most people are experiencing love from the perspective of what they can get it, what it means to them, and how it makes them feel, but they're not able to get on the other side of that equation. So that struck me a lot in the book. She spends a good bit of time talking about patriarchy, and I have to say she definitely widened my view of what patriarchy is. I didn't. I think I always saw it as just that back and forth struggle between men and women, but I didn't see it as like a power dynamic in that broader way where she almost ties it in some ways to capitalism, and how there's almost got to be, and even in love, a superior and inferior individual in the situation, and somebody has to impose. It's almost like imposing their will on the other person, and she compares it to the isms, sexism, racism. And when you step back, you're like, I never quite saw it that way. It really did give me a different sense of what patriarchy is. I think most, not, I shouldn't say most, but just for me, it's like you understand how embedded it is in society, but it's hard to figure out how you unwind it. And she kind of talks about how men many times, and I probably even say most even who view themselves as progressive thinkers and are all about the idea of the empowerment of women, and being there for their women and wanting the success career wise. So women still struggle with the dynamics of what happens in the home, and who's this subconsciously feeling like, well, it's your job to kind of run the house and run the home, and it's not really my job. And um, she's fair. She points out too that a lot of women are also stuck in being unable to think of the different dynamics in the home, and that's a long road. I just want to say that she gets into it in the book, and you spend a lot of time in the book focused on that. And another thing that caught me a lot, because I think it's one of the things that's missing a lot in society, is she talks about community and community love, and how and I kind of can remember it a bit from growing up, and I hear about my parents and how they grew up, and growing up in the South, around their bigger family, and the family unit being bigger and around you, and all your family there, how you had that sort of community love. Now, me, somebody who grew up in New York, it translates to I definitely grew up on a block where I knew literally almost everybody on the block. I might have not been tight with everybody, but I knew who they were. There was connections. New York City blocks always had block parties, and that connecting piece that brought people together to make it feel like you weren't alone in this and by yourself, and how much that's gone, in today's times. It's like, I've been living in the same place for a pretty long while, and I loosely know neighbors. I know, the people right immediately by me, but I don't really know everybody on this block. And you couldn't go to everybody, and there isn't a sense of real community connection. And she really talks about that a lot. That's one of the biggest things that empowers empowers capitalism, and empowers this sort of cynicism, is that the breaking up of community, making you feel more isolated on your own, to do everything, not knowing who you would like call upon to do anything. If you needed help near you, I mean, most people, I, I'd be hard pressed. There might be a couple people on this block that we could like call if we really needed something, but it isn't the same as the way I grew up, where I knew exactly who to go to if something happened and needed help, and I knew everybody in the building that I lived in, and it was just a different world. And I think that she brings that forward in a way where you have to really think a lot about how do we bring back community, she talks about the value of friendship and how much that means, and not falling into the trap of like elevating your relationship love and your romantic love to this pedestal up here, but you're neglecting that the friends and the love of friends could be every bit as important and mean every bit as much as the person that you have like invested all these expectations and beliefs and wants and hopes and dreams in, and then you're sort of put it all in one person. That's not really the way love was meant to be. So on so many levels, the book is deep on so many levels. It's hard to even get and cover everything that you will get out of reading the book. But I personally would strongly recommend, particularly for men, I would strongly recommend, like reading All About Love, reading it with open mind. Think about your own experiences over your lifetime, especially if you're Gen X like me. You definitely have lived through a number of situations, and it might come to you what you could have done different or what could have been different if you had come to it with a different like lens and a different perspective. And I definitely think back to the idea that I definitely got married and thought that, oh, I'm not really supposed to kind of have, I mean, you have your friends, but those close friends, that there's a way that you're supposed to go about it. Like now you've got to have like, couples friends, but not your friends who've been around you all the time, especially if they're, single, because that might throw, the relationship and the marriage off. And it's just all this false thinking that we bring to the table that we have to kind of reevaluate and rethink. And she gets a little bit into, this is probably the last thing I'm gonna mention. She gets into the idea that we're so convinced by media and Hollywood and this idea of sort of falling in love, and that there's just really no quote falling in love. Love that you just don't. It just doesn't just happen like that. There's an investment that happens on all levels in many different ways over the course of the relationship. That just, if you're looking for an easy ride, you know, love isn't the easy ride that you're looking for. You might want to think of something else. It's I just say again, it's really deep. I think you should read it. All About Love by Bell Hooks is an older book. You can probably, I guess probably pick it up at online for maybe $10, $15. You might even be able to just rent it from a bookstore. I actually found, my copy in a what is it, a thrift store. I found my copy in a thrift store, looked brand new, just as good. So check it out, go get it. This is my second review. Please stick with me on Ink and Audible. I'll be back. I got another book that I'm very close to finishing up. It's called Death of the Author. It is it's got my attention. It's not like anything I've quite read before, and I think you're gonna enjoy it, but I'm gonna give you a full review on that later. This is Mike again with Ink and Audible. Peace.